Fury Road being the first film that I worked on as a digital film. We had other problems. When I came on board, there was something like 24 cameras had been built. One of them was that, 3D uses two lenses. It's a time-wasting process on set. Could take an hour. I got very frustrated that even though we had our storyboard camera up exactly where the storyboard required it, there were other cutaways the editor might like to have or might need. Prior to 3,000 years, I did say to George, I'm really sorry, but I've got an eye problem. I've got macular disintegration, so I'm going to, lose my eyesight eventually. Don't know when, but eventually. And now I wanted as much time with my family, my wife, Australia, traveling, doing what we want to do when we want to do it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast and Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. I have today, yet again, legendary cinematographer John Seale, who I've had the pleasure of having on this podcast countless times. He has been on to talk about Dead Poets Society, The English Patient, and many, many other films, Lorenzo's Oil. And today he's here to talk about his first digital film that he shot, Mad Max Fury Road. John talked about some challenges, personal challenges, cinematic challenges, filming on location, and it was a wonderful conversation as always. I really enjoy talking to him and picking his brain from all the knowledge that he has gained over his long career. So without further ado, here's my conversation with cinematographer John Seale. Fury Road, which I had seen several years ago, I think 29 when it came out, maybe 2016, 2017. And then I just saw it this morning again. And I went to see Furiosa. I think it came out last year when I was in Miami. And again, just watching this after Furiosa and connecting the dots and obviously the visual element of it and everything and your relationship with George. A wonderful film. And I wanted to ask, did you know or did George tell you that he's going to make a prequel eventually, or did that sort of come later on without having any conversations with you at early stage of Fury Road?
Um, yes, no, it did come up. I knew on Fury Road that George had a prequel and a sequel of Fury Road, which I was interested in for a number of reasons, but one of them being why would you shoot Fury Road before the before the prequel?
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to do that. There were obviously reasons. I think Fury Road um, was developed. Well, I know it was in pre-production for 10 years prior to us shooting it, and actually got going and stopped because of the Middle East war, I believe. Um, Made it very difficult for them or to think they could continue. Um, and so in that 10 years, I'm sure that even prior to that, um, the script was being developed because it was although interestingly, there was no script at all. There was not a written script, which shatters a lot of people, that a film of that magnitude cannot have a script. But no, it didn't have a script. And when I arrived, by virtue of the fact that the great Dean Semler was going to shoot it, as he always had shot Mad Max movies,
Mm.
um, but I was asked to pick it up because Dean had to leave for personal reasons. Um, and I asked for a script, and they went, "There isn't one." And I said, "Well, can you give me 10 minutes and tell me what the movie's about?" And anyway, I went up to the Fury Road conference room, and there was, I think it was 3,500 storyboard pics that had been carefully worked out over that 10 years by George, um, along with his storyboard artists. And they'd spent a lot of time, and they actually created and wrote the movie in storyboard pictures. So the way you went to look at, at how the film was laid out was by storyboards, because there's virtually minimal dialogue in the
Yeah.
film. So it seemed to me to be, I didn't mind. I thought that's great, but I had a bit of trouble working out the storyline from the pictures because you do need to have a visual flow, and you don't get that. So when you're looking at pictures, so I was still a little bit behind the eight ball, but I knew George from Lorenzo's Oil, and I knew what I'd heard on the grapevine, that it was all going very well story wise. And I really did feel it was going to be a very iconic movie. So when I got the phone call, much that I was anticipating, maybe changing my lifestyle, i.e., retirement out of film, but not life, I jumped at it. I mean, I loved working with George on Lorenzo's Oil. I knew it would be an iconic film. It was in the desert. It was out in the open. It was an action movie, and I knew that it would be. I knew it would be good, so I jumped at it.
And I'm glad that you talked about, you were kind of like retired and, you went back and I'm pretty sure had it been some other film which something that you have similarly shot before, you probably would have turned it down. But because this was such one of those challenging films and iconic and every frame is like a painting, right? And what's amazing to me is that, again, when I was watching it, you'll see, just to kind of give an example, I mean, there's so many wonderful action sequences. You'll see this sequence, I don't know which one it was, but in the wide shot, you have this person flying out of the car because it exploded. And it cuts to a sort of a, I would say maybe 85 millimeter, 100 millimeter, where you see Charlize Theron, um, Furiosa, in the truck, and this person literally just kind of goes right in front of the camera and falls down from that cut. So those little details that you see, it was just mind-boggling because you can see that in any dramatic film, but in that kind of a large action scale, I mean, it didn't have to be shown in that 85 to 100 millimeter or whatever that lens focal length was, but it was, and I appreciated that very much.
The thing is that over the years, a lot of films have been storyboarded. Um, Basically, they were always a guide to the film, but it didn't. It depended on how gospel they were when you actually got on the set with actors and the actual situation. Um, so when I was in the pre-production for Fury Road, I said to George, "How gospel are the storyboards?" And he said, "Very." With a reserve, but very gospel. So I knew that the work that had gone into those storyboards, we were to follow pretty closely, which we did. Um, in the shooting, I was well into multiple cameras for any action films, dialogue films, any film at all. I was going to put in multiple cameras. I just think that they work very, very well. And your challenge to lighting for those multiple cameras is the challenge that I was ready to accept. So I found it a little difficult to go into a one camera film. Um, and we had the cameras there. We had the crew and the cameras to do 3 and 4 cameras because it was an action film pretty well all the way through. So it was very difficult to suddenly say, oh no, we're only going to use one camera
Yeah.
and follow the storyboards very closely. Um, we did, it went for about 6 weeks of the shoot. It was a very long shoot. So the first 6 weeks, I got very frustrated because I felt that even though we had our storyboard camera up exactly where the storyboard required it. There were other cutaways that I felt the editor might like to have or might need, which is always the case in a lot of fast-cutting action movies.
Sure.
The more material you've got, the better. But every time we got out of the car on the location, I'd say to George, "I'll set those other cameras up today, George. See if we can get some nice stuff." "Oh, I don't think we need them. We'll be using our main camera." And oh, okay. But after 6 weeks, I got very angst about it because I just felt we were losing the opportunity for a lot of coverage.
Mm.
So when I got out of the car, I think my tone must have changed a little, and I must have said, "George, I'm setting the cameras up today." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, okay, Johnny, if you think that we can get something there." "Oh, yep. And away we went. Well, I think George enjoyed it like most directors when they see 3 and 4 cameras pop up on their monitors. And they can see, I felt the angle changes were broad enough to satisfy, I hoped, an editor like Margie, that they weren't similar shots, which is a waste of time and money. That they're always um, a good cutaway piece of material. So I worked hard on that and got it going. And there were some funny moments with the multiple cameras, but um, George came around to it in the end. It was like osmosis. It quietly worked on him, and he could look across and see, a nice little shot of the girls there, one of the girls there reacting to what was going on. And I felt that we worked hard to get good material. And he was very, very lovely at the end um, when he said to a big group of cinematographers as guest speaker about the film that it was lovely that second unit and first unit did put in multiple cameras. They never had to do a pickup shot in post, did not have to shoot. They always found what they wanted hanging somewhere in that bank of pixels um, pixels that they had. They always found what they wanted to make the scene work. So I was very pleased with that.
That's amazing. You mentioned, I think it's the difference how you say it, not just you, me, or anybody else. When you tell somebody something, seems like when you ask somebody something, it's like more like a permission thing, right? And then
Oh,
when you say, you know what, this is what I'm going to do, and they're like, oh, this person is serious. Now I better listen to him. So it's the authority versus ask. And I think he probably noticed, and obviously he's worked with you, so he, took you seriously. And I think that's something that we all sort of strive to do, that authority versus, ask. And sometimes you have to put your foot down, which I'm glad you did because it shows. And I kid you not, you were talking about editing. Not for 1 second I noticed a cut. Not for 1 second. Because the choreograph of the entire film on camera and the movements are so dynamic that you can't tell when it's cutting, and there's just so much action from super wide to super tight. Everything is in there.
that's what I loved about working with George. And I knew that after Lorenzo's Oil, which was quite a markedly different kind of film, and therefore pictorially different as well, but what George brought to that was a visualization that I'd never experienced with a director before. And I really liked it because it was different uh, and it worked. And that's what I loved about it. And I think that when I did get to study the storyboards for Fury Road very closely to try and anticipate every problem I might have, of every technical problem I might need to cope with, it showed how carefully they had actually worked in making that storyboard flow. and I'm a great believer in that a flow of editing that camera people can give to an editor to be able to cut into a flow that doesn't jar. So that way you're actually helping to pick the audience up and take them into that world of ours through that sort of virtual window of a screen and get them into the story, not watching it, but in it. And I think that Fury Road in the end result, I have to agree too that with the music and the editing, the flow, it does grab the audience because of that. And there's not, I don't think, too many jarring moments that might send them scurrying back to their seats and eating popcorn and waiting for the next action piece to happen. It George was going to make sure that editorially the speed would help to keep the audience in the film, actually part of the film. And I think that's an essential piece
Of
of
course.
filmmaking tool that you really do need to follow as best you can, I think.
200%. I totally agree. You know, you had worked on English Patient with Anthony Minghella way back in the 90s, and it's a similar film in terms of location, like deserts, right? But this is way more intense. Um, and even at that time, when you worked with him, when I spoke to you, you talked about the challenges of shooting in the desert, and there were sometimes deserts, sandstorms and all that. But here you have pretty much every single thing from beginning to end in the mountains and the desert. And there's even in the shots you see a lot of dust naturally because everything is moving at rapid speed. Was that challenging, not just for the camera, but also for the crew? Because it's not the most healthiest thing to be able to deal with that for that long period of time, right?
It is, but any desert experience gives you the experience to go into the next one
Mm,
um, with a lovely crew that are battle ready to go into a desert and battle dust. Dust is the enemy. Generally, on photochemical shoots with film, um, dust in the gate, a bit of sand in the can wreck the entire reel.
sure.
And you might not know about it until it's processed in London 4 days later. Um, and that becomes a real drama. But I did find that Fury Road being the first film that I worked on as a digital film,
Okay.
uh, we had other problems, overheating problems. Um, we had these great big boxes that we had to carry with the cameras on rigs of platforms that were mounted around the war rig to do all the close-ups inside while we were doing it. The crew were fantastic. I must say, um, Dean Semler put together the crew, basically grips and electrics, and most of the camera. I added some on camera, which was fantastic, and they went and found we had 27 people on our camera crew. It's a lot
Wow.
of people, um, and they found them all over the world. They were English, American, South African, Australian, New Zealanders. We found them all over the world and put them together for that film, and they were fantastic. They all chipped in and got on with it. And we tried to anticipate any problems, obviously, with the digital cameras, and the team did a great job on that. So we were pretty ready. We were also lucky enough to get the M cameras from I think it was the Bond film with Roger Deakins.
Okay.
Um, that they developed for that, and they were great. They were about this big. They were still about 4 times bigger than the cameras are now, but
Right.
we thought they were so fantastic because they were so small, and we were able to hand hold them behind the seat, and the other camera, seeing whoever was in that seat, couldn't see the camera behind the seat filming the girls at the same time, which was the beauty of the multiple cameras and the beauty of these new small ones. So we're all pretty excited about that. And once we got into this routine of throwing cameras in, I think it gave Margie, the editor, Margie Siskel, nightmares. As she said, I think she had over 400 hours of material to
That's something
cut
that
down.
documentary does. 500 hour, 400 hours.
Exactly. And she had to cut that down to 2 hours. So it gave her nightmares, but I think the end result it was is
Yeah.
there, of course. So all of that, um, the challenge of the desert was there's a lot of pre-existing experience in there to combat that. I found that the digital cameras, because they weren't film, were fantastic because you could seal them up and the chip would last for an hour. Whereas on film, you were reloading after every 4 minutes or 10 minutes,
Yeah.
whatever magazine you had on board. It would have been a nightmare. I think we'd still be there shooting it 15, 20 years later. So it was a really good exercise in that.
It makes so much sense now because again, we're talking about the invisible editing, and I was wondering about, if there's some big action sequences. I think when one of the vehicle blows up and you see it from a close up and you see it from super wide and you get a medium, and I was thinking in that shot that they must have only exploded it once because why would they spend so much money on multiple explosions of a similar truck vehicle? So that explains it, that there was probably a camera on a vehicle next to it that got that medium shot, and because all these vehicles are so rigged up, it just blends in perfectly.
The whole thing about the stunts on that movie was so incredible. After the 10 years of pre-production, Guy Norris's very, very uh, uh, active mind in how to create incredibly dangerous looking stunts safely. And a lot of the time, people find it fairly hard to believe the truck's not moving at all. It's being rocked on giant airbags. The whole truck was lifted up on airbags, and those airbags then could rock the truck in different modes. Um, that created what George and Dean found on earlier Mad Maxes, the liberty to be able to shoot anything that didn't show a lot of action around it. They could do it when the truck was standing still.
Mm.
So everybody was perfectly safe. And we could use normal 30-foot cranes, normal Steadicam, hand holding, normal cameras. And all it was the truck was rocking to give, so the actors had a bit of movement and it was in unison with the people in the back. That was all fantastically worked out long before I got there. And all of
Wow.
this was Guy Norris's fertile mind. The other thing is when the truck did smash into something, neither one of them wasn't moving. And it generally was the little one that was going to get hit. That would be set up as a static car, and the truck would come roaring down and hit it. And that then made it so much safer for everybody that the stunt wasn't a rolling stunt. And all of this was Guy Norris's very, very fertile mind as the stunt coordinator in putting together a movie that could very well have had some bad accidents, but never looked like it. He had it all totally controlled, and all his boys were really well rehearsed. And it gets back to the storyboard, the gospel storyboard. They knew it wouldn't change. There would never be a what if. What if we did it this way? No,
Mm.
you couldn't do that. It was all worked out. so safely. And then George was able to visualize it with his storyboard artists. And then with Guy Norris, lots of meetings they had, obviously, to coordinate all of this creative thinking, to be able to put that action movie together very safely. And never did we feel. I remember once I thought I was going to fall off the truck because it was rocking,
Mm,
and I was doing a handheld uh, kind of semi-running shot down the full length of the trailer into Max's face, and the truck was rocking really badly, and I'm 70 years old, and I thought I'm going to fall off this truck, but I had a safety on, which would have stopped me about a metre down, so I wouldn't have got hurt. And having been a sailor on yachts at sea, where the motion is not dissimilar, I
yeah.
found that I was able to control that. But I lost the image in the camera because I couldn't hold it to my eye. It was all too rough. I was looking at the monitor, but the sun blew the monitor out. So in the end, I was pointing the camera where I thought it should be pointed, and it was there. So all of it were, I didn't fall off the truck and I got the shot. I couldn't believe it.
That's incredible.
Good.
That's
And there
incredible.
was
And you're, sorry,
never
go
a
on.
what if, never a what if. It was always, that's the stunt, nothing changes. And so had to be very disciplined on that.
That's incredible. You're talking about stunts. I think I may I don't know. You tell me if because you shot the film. My guess is there maybe were one or two sequences, not sequences, shots, I would say, that looked like there was a little bit of green screen, but I wasn't sure. But everything else seemed pretty much practical to me. Was it all
No,
100%
exactly
practical?
right. No, there was a proportion of green screen that had to be done, and even out in the desert. I mean, one of the funniest things you can ever see is the war rig in the middle of the desert, surrounded by green screens, and we're already there. It
Yeah,
was quite,
yeah.
but technically we had some brilliant visual effects people and post production visual people there handling all of that. Absolutely brilliant they were. And they would call the shots on that, and just say, look, we're going to have to go green screen for
Mm,
this particular thing. So yes, there is a combination of really everything at our disposal to make that film.
amazing. Let me talk about the look of the film. So, pretty much the entire film, I would say a good 80% of the film is daytime, and there's some night shots. The blue, filter or tint or whatever you want to call it. So let's start with the day one. The desert. The great thing about this film is that visually, yes, there's all these great compositions, but the color, right? You have the desert, and then you have the human skin. It is like, there's so much contrast, there's so much texture to all of that. Yet you see the skies being as normal as they are. There's no sort of highlights issue or hue issue. What was that daylight part like in terms of getting the look right? And the nighttime sequences, were they actually in night, or were they more like in the dawn, or was it shot during early morning and done in post? If you can break that down one by one.
Joe, it's all of that, all of what you've just said we had
Okay.
to do. we
Okay.
were on the we were in Namibia in Africa on the coast, and it was very like LA in that the water, the ocean was very cold. And so we'd get a fog would come in, and often we'd be shooting in fog. And second unit with David Burr as cinematographer, doing a great job with his boys on most of the big stunts. He'd be 30 or 40 kilometres inland, and it'd be acid blue skies and no fog and lovely sunny situation. And I would be shooting to match the same scene. I'd be shooting on the coast in fog with a white sky and a softening of the mist. And I said to George at one stage, I said, George, this is not going to match. I've just talked to David up in the desert, 30 kilometres inland. He's got bright blue skies and sunny. And I said, we're in the middle of fog. And George put his hand on my shoulder. He said, don't worry, Johnny, we'll fix it in post. And they did. I can tell it easily because I know when it happened and I can look for it. But the boys in post, Eric Whip from Canada, an Australian in Canada, is George's #1 colorist. And he did an amazing job of matching non-matching shots. And it's something that, yes, the post now is very capable of doing. It can also change a lot of what you do. So, in fact, because the stunts were so complicated, we'd often only do 3 shots a day. But they were,
Really?
oh yeah, regularly 3 shots. In fact, if we did 3, we were working hard. Sometimes it was only 2, because if you can imagine how long it took to put all the trucks into position, get them going,
Yeah.
to run your rehearsals, run them all back, it took hours. And to get it all exactly as George wanted it. And the storyboard had it. So we might get a shot in at 11 o'clock in the morning that should be dawn, but it's nowhere near dawn. And I didn't have to worry about it because the modern technology of post meant that Eric could quite easily change the skies, the contrast. He could change the density, color densities, and turn it into dawn. As simple as that. So post was relied on heavily to keep our continuity of light going and also to even create and maintain our time of day continuity.
That's crazy. I mean, this was 10 years ago, and so much has evolved even since then, even especially in the last year or two, that, you can probably do way more than, the colorist, I think you mentioned Eric was able to do. And yeah, no, hats off. I mean, it's one heck of an engaging film, and the contrast and the colors are just so vibrant, even though they're not. And I've even found, the costumes. They're just everything about that film, without production design and costumes and vehicle, development. What if that's part of production design? Nothing against your cinematography and editing. I mean, they're fabulous, but the film literally stands on those few things because that's what makes the film so visual on camera.
It does. It's my first digital film, and it came at a time when the post production facilities and capabilities were becoming amazing, and George grabs that. He grabs hold of any technology, cameras, people. I mean, he was building his own 3D cameras to shoot that film when
Mm,
I came on board. Um, and it was an amazing exercise to build a camera, 3D camera that could go through the window of the truck. Most of them
wow.
up till then were half the size of a Volkswagen, and we couldn't have made the film at all with any of them. And George knew that. So years before he started building his own 3D cameras in Australia. So when I came on board, there was something like 24 cameras had been built, and a lot of lovely technical things were created for that. One of them was that 3D uses 2 lenses, and you have to synchronize those 2 lenses and
Hmm.
align them perfectly. But it's a time wasting process. On set could take an hour, and somebody must have said to George, this will take a long time to align the lenses. Do you want to watch your dailies in 3D or 2D? And I think George must have said something like, well, what are you getting at? And they said, well, if you only want to watch them in 2D, i.e. from one lens, well, we don't have to align them then. We can align those lenses up in post using algorithms. So he said, I'll watch it in 2D. So that meant that we didn't have to align the two lenses. And that's what George is thinking, which I find so incredibly creative in itself, in that the technical difficulties of making a film for George are there, but they're problematical and can be solved. And George's way of doing it is to keep the pace of the film going. He wasn't going to waste an hour realigning. The other thing was changing a lens from a 50 mil to a
Yeah,
75 mil meant a lot of time. Changing, taking them out, putting new ones in, realigning those, and you could go and have your lunch every time. So
that's
what
true.
happened, George? They ended up building a camera body for every lens. So you didn't change the lenses, you just changed the camera. So that, if that's the 75 mil camera, and this is the 50 mil camera,
Yeah,
that's the 25 mil. So you changed the whole camera. So hopefully you've had technicians lining the lenses up and they're waiting ready, and you just carefully put the camera on the dolly, tripod, crane, whatever it was, and it's lined up, and away you go and shoot. And I thought, this is crazy, amazing, amazingly good technical thinking if you've got the money. So I was enamored in all of that thinking, and loved that fact. But in pre-production, and only a couple of months before we started shooting, we had a meeting on the Monday morning, and George came in and said, I've got some news. And he said, stood up and he said, we're not going 3D. I'm going to shoot it all 2D. And he turned to me and said, so Johnny, what cameras are you going to use? Well, I'd never done a digital film. So I sat there and my mouth was moving, but nothing coming out. And I went, well, George, I'm a Panavision man, have always been a Panavision man. I'll give them a ring, see what they've got, and away we'll go. And the first assistant director leaned over and he said, Alexas. And I said, probably Alexas, George, something like that. They've got those in stock. We'll have a look at the good, Johnny, go for it. But it's 2D. Well, my gosh, that made such big changes to the actual way we could shoot that film. It meant we could use Canon 5Ds for crash cameras, and we'd have a dozen Canons still cameras on board that could shoot as crash cameras. Of course, they're only small. We're able
yeah,
to stick them all over the trucks. And when we got to doing the stunt, once the main cameras were in, there'd be a rush, and the grips had a case full of little clamps and clips and gaffer tape, and we would just race around the truck, and I'd say, see if you can put one in there, put one there, put one there, one there, one. And we'd keep going until the first AD would say, everybody out, we're rolling. So we might only get 9 cameras in, and we had a dozen that we could have put up. And we lost a couple every day.
of course.
Um, but a Canon 5D on a budget like that was pretty cheap
Yeah,
for a crash camera. So
yeah,
we'd just go and buy another 3 or 4 cameras and blew them up. So it enabled us to come off 3D to 2D. It enabled us to saturate really the film with cameras and be able to then give Margie in the edit um, pretty good coverage.
that's amazing. And you talked about George's what's the word I'm looking for? His knack for technology. I mean, if you look at films like Babe, that came out in the mid 90s, Talking Pig, and then not just talking pig, talking ducks, talking everything, talking sheep. And it was done so seamlessly that, now you can probably say that's being done seamlessly by other people. And the same thing with Happy Feet, another breakthrough in technology. And I mean, if you look at filmography, right, Mad Max, Babe, Lorenzo's Oil, um, Happy Feet, and so many other films, it's just all over the map. And
Yeah,
I really I probably didn't appreciate his work probably until maybe 15 years ago. And I mean, I think he's definitely one of the most underrated directors out there because he's visually very, very spot on about how to tell a story.
I agree totally. I think his film mind is an amazingly fertile place. He's a very studied man. He reads everything he can about film. He watches everything he can, and he's analysing all the time. I don't think necessarily what makes a good film. It's more how can I entertain the audience? He denies it, but I swear he said it that he wanted people to walk into Fury Road with their big bucket of popcorn, settle themselves into the seat, and get ready for an action movie and start eating their popcorn. The credits go through, the movie starts, and within 2 minutes, he's got them. And for 2 hours, he's still got them and they haven't eaten their popcorn because they've been enthralled and they're in the movie. And that's where our years of thinking about how we make movies, how we can make films that really make people become part of the film, not just watching it. Um, and I think that's what George does. You know, his sense in editing and sitting there watching him in an edit saying, run that because I forget the numbers, but 80% of Fury Road is not running at 24 frames a second. It's running slower, which is speeding it up. And so he'd be saying, show me that at 12 frames, run that shot at 12 frames. And we'd watch it. Then he'd say, 13, try 13 frames. And we'd watch it. And you can tell the difference. It's quite interesting what the brain can perceive. Then he'd say, run it at 10. And so we'd watch it at 10. And he'd say, run at 13 again. And 13, okay, go 13. And that made it fit in because he in the edit would have the few times that I got into there to watch and listen. If a shot was 2.5 seconds long, which is the average length of every shot in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and an audience preview might have written, I didn't understand what that shot was. What did that shot? I couldn't understand what visually that shot said. So he would slow it down, but he wouldn't lengthen it. And I found that interesting. He wouldn't lengthen it, but he'd slow it down until you did understand visually what that shot was saying. He never let any shot go into the movie unless it helped progress the story.
Yeah.
And I love that. And he used the speed of the projection to do it, not the length of the cut. And that is, I think, a very interesting way of getting the audience and keeping the audience locked into the flow of the film. He's using every aspect rather than tried and proven editing. Just do it in the edit. No, it doesn't happen. There's other things you can do. So he does them and he searches them out. And you've got to love that.
Absolutely. And one of the things I wish, nothing to take away from Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible films. I mean, they're fantastic. Tom Cruise being in 60 years or 61 years old, still doing the stunts, and there's a big publicity about it all the time. There's the making of, I don't know if you've seen the most recent one. They always have these little featurettes about how they did it. It's really when I was watching this film, it really saddened me that it was probably not to the definitely not to that intensity because Charlize Theron is a big actress, so is Tom Hardy, but that element of pushing, and telling people how this was done. I think that makes people appreciate the film more. Not that it wasn't appreciated, but just, you want to see how it was done. At least I do. I'm very curious, maybe because I'm in the industry. And you have to educate the audience that this was not just like some shot in front of green screen from beginning to end. There was a lot of practical stuff in there.
Oh, exactly. And I think that, it's lovely, to be honest, doing podcasts such as this so that the students of film, of whatever age they are, doesn't matter, um, can get an understanding of the thinking of filmmakers that can make a film like Fury Road such an incredible visual experience. Um, and even with Tom's stuff with his Mission Impossible is the same, and in most of them actually. And I think that the, the lovely thing I think about Fury Road in particular that I liked was that the realism was never lost either.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
could be happening. Um, it's not so unheard of action wise or um, impact wise by using stunts that might never be able to happen. The only one, of course, is in Fury Road, which I feel borders on that, is the storm sequence,
I was going to
um,
talk about that, yeah.
which obviously is one heck of a lot of post and background post painting. Um, but it was all part of the message to say, the world is changing, the temperatures increasing and storms are getting far more violent, and they have to get through one of them. And so, fair enough, just a little, in my mind, a little over the top maybe, but it seemed to fit in general. It didn't hang on it too long. It just did it and got on with the story, which was good. But basically, I think everything else that happens in Fury Road could happen. And I
I
think
agree.
that's a big point with audiences, that there's no sense of a disbelief of what's happening. It's like, oh my gosh, I could have been there. I could, that could happen to me. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's really lovely. You're putting the audience into that film to the point where they think, oh my gosh, I wouldn't like to be there, you know, but not so amazingly out there that
Yeah.
they know it could never happen. I like that about George's realities.
True. True. And just to wrap things up, when you finished Fury Road and he had talked to you about Fiosa, the prequel, was there ever a conversation to bring you on board, or was it a schedule thing, or was it like you were like, I'm done, this is it? How did that ever come up? Did you shoot the prequel?
Oh, yes. No, it did. Very lovely too from George, invitation. Um, because I did I did enjoy Fury Road and working with George so much that when he offered 3,000 Years of Longing, um, I jumped at that. I thought it's a smaller film,
Mm-hmm.
reasonably. It was in Sydney, in Australia, so I'd be home, which is good. Um, and during that, and in fact prior to um, 3,000 Years of Longing, while we were in Istanbul on surveys, George, very lovely, um, invited me to do Furiosa. But I had committed to changing my life, and I'd almost done it before Fury Road. So I was going into a bit of overtime by doing 3,000 Years of Longing. And so prior to 3,000 Years, I did say to George, I'm really sorry, but I've got an eye problem. I've got macular disintegration, so I'm going to lose my eyesight eventually. Don't know when, but eventually. And now I wanted as much time with my family, my wife, Australia, traveling, doing what we want to do when we want to do it.
Hmm.
Um, those films, they're very long. They're 8 months, 9 months of your life. And I just felt after Fury Road that no, it was definitely time for me to stop and find our new life, which I've done. So it was a very lovely invitation, but one I passed on and continued to do 3,000 Years. Thoroughly enjoyed that, um, working on that with George. Totally different film, completely, but loved the challenge of shooting that and making it what George wanted. And that was good enough for me. I thought, yeah, no, I'm out of it. Another action movie, I thought, in a way, I've been there and done that, and I'm really happy with what I helped to make. And this little one of George's 3,000 Years of Longing was a lovely little love story that, um, again, was so different and with lots of challenges in the shooting of it. And I thought that was good enough for me. I wrapped it up, and Furiosa was done by a younger man, and rightly so, and did a beautiful job.
Yeah. I don't know that you did 3,000 Years of Longing, and I haven't even seen it, so I gotta check that out. But first of all, sorry to hear about, your eyesight, and you were talking about, you want to live your life as it is in terms of checking out all the stuff that you can before anything happens. I highly recommend there is this film if you got a chance. It's literally similar to the story that you're going through. It's a documentary called Blink. Have you heard of it?
I have. I've heard of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's on Disney Plus by National Geographic. It's about a Canadian couple who have four kids, and two or three of them had this rare disease at birth, which is like one in a million, that they were going to lose their eyesight by a certain age. They're going to go blind. And so the parents actually dropped everything, they quit their jobs, and they traveled the world to show their kids the world before two of them or three of them lose their eyesight. And it's a very great film, family film. But I thought of that when you mentioned that how you have to see the world, before things go down south.
And that's exactly what we're doing. I mean, what I've got is hereditary. They can't change it.
Yeah,
I'm seeing good people, doing my best to prolong the shutdown, but it's going to happen, and I'm living with it. But I just very sadly feel that I couldn't spend the time away. Working still when I would love to be traveling or having a look at a lot of things around the world or in Australia or whatever before it does shut down. So that decision was made, and I've held on to that and moving on and enjoying it thoroughly, actually. I'm as busy as all get out.
that's amazing. And if you don't mind me asking, did the doctors give you any timeline or just could happen out of nowhere?
No, it started. There's a little indication of it. That's how they found it. Um, but it could be years. It could be 10 years. It could be eight, five. I very nicely have a neighbour who is a pill maker, and he has a pill out that is supposed to help belay the process. So I'm taking some of his pills, obviously.
You got
Um,
nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose at all. Their energy, they're only a supplementary
Yeah.
diet, energy pills to boost the system a little bit and hope to hold it back. So doing that, but otherwise, no, it's going to happen. That's okay. But at the moment, still going well.
Well, I hope it doesn't happen anytime soon, or it never happens. And I pray for that. And, again, you and I have talked so many times, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Thank you for all the masterful work. I don't like to compare anybody because everybody's unique, but if there's few cinematographers whose work I've really enjoyed, Roger Deakins, yourself, Janusz
Oh, yeah.
Kaminski.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I can just go on and on about it. It's just phenomenal. So thank you for all the work you've done and the stories that you've chosen to tell us. They're marvelous.
Oh, Joe, thank you so much. That's most kind. Most kind.